We don't have to dramatize the situation. However, the amount of failing leaders at the moment is astonishing and, quite frankly, worrying. One of the many examples is PO Ferries. Some of you, when you are now listening from the UK, might have heard about the issue. PO Ferries is a significant, large cruise and ferry operator, and they decided that after surviving the pandemic and making a huge announcement, which they prepared for weeks, where they said it's not going to be a bankruptcy announcement because they recovered, and after they said that they have a new value and mission and they know where the purpose is going, etc., etc., the CEO, Peter Hebblethwaite, fired 800 people on a Zoom call. It's not even the first time that this happened, and I have no idea why CEOs still think that firing people via a Zoom call could be remotely appropriate. I'm not politically left-winged. I'm not a member of any union, so I'm not sitting here trying to defend workers' rights due to a political orientation. We have an international ferry operator who fires 800 people, not because they want to cut staff. That could happen in any organization after a pandemic, that you have lower demand and you need less people. No, they are replacing people who work for less money. So 800 people get fired, being replaced by 800 people working for less money. In this case, about £5 an hour. For our international listeners, that is less than €6. That is about $6 something per hour. No one is able to survive on these salaries. And not only that, it gets worse very quickly. By firing people in this particular manner, P&O broke the law, and the CEO, Peter Hebblethwaite, was subpoenaed to come to the House of Commons. That is the place where in the UK democracy happens, where laws are designed, where laws are put into practice, where laws are voted upon, where laws are decided either to be accepted or not. So you're sitting there at the roots of the democracy of the country, and you're questioned about your behavior. And the CEO, Peter Hebblethwaite, in this place, the main place of democracy of the country, said, yes, we broke the law, and I stand by my decision, and he would do it again. That's what he said. And that is a new quality of failing leaders. I, quite frankly, would have never expected that we will face a situation where CEOs publicly go to the House of Parliament or to the German Bundestag or to the Senate or to the Congress or any other place of democracy and publicly say, I don't care about your laws, I would do it again. I break them deliberately. And the main issue is that these CEOs and their behavior have a dramatic influence on whole industries. And of course, now MPs in the House of Commons, they of course demand that P&O will lose their license, not be able to operate at all anymore in the future. And not only that, the MCA, the Maritime Coast Guard Agency, actually detained 2 ferries of P&O because they were unfit to sail. When you replace staff, it normally takes, depending on the situation, numerous days, sometimes weeks, to train people properly so they are able to take over the job they should do. And if this doesn't happen, the whole ferry is deemed unfit to sail. And that happened right here. So what are the next steps now? Well, new laws are coming, and P&O now, after trying to replace 800 people, now is on the brink of probably going out of business, losing 2,000 jobs completely. And the reaction in numerous industries is quite shocking, because there are still people who are defending this kind of behavior. And especially some leaders say, well, when it's necessary to get rid of people, you have to do so. Well, I wouldn't disagree with that. If you have to get rid of people to save the company, you have to do so. But there are laws that show you the boundaries of what you can and cannot do. The main issue is that people already have very low trust, especially in larger organizations, which are management-led and not owner-led. In these management-led organizations, trust towards the highest level of leaders already is pretty low. And when we see situations like these, like the one I just described, the trust in leaders will become lower and lower and lower day by day. So, of course, the main question now is how to do it better. So, first, there are 3 aspects which we will never negotiate if they are even remotely acceptable as a means of action when it comes to working as a leader. Number 1, deliberately breaking the law. That is never an option. Full stop. This is not going to be negotiated. I'm honestly astonished that I have to mention that on a podcast. So, hey, please don't break the law. Wow, what an insight. So no matter what you have to accomplish or do in your organization, never deliberately break the law. Number two, no obvious breach of moral and ethics. And I know what the reaction now will be. People will say, well, moral and ethics are something very personal. So there are different moral and ethics, and the understanding around that is very different from person to person and from country to country, company to company, and culture to culture. Yes. But no matter how you try to twist it, telling people the whole company is recovering, and by the way, I replace 800 people for cheaper workers. There's not a single place on earth, not a single reasonable place of moral and ethics where this behavior would be considered remotely acceptable or even tolerable. So number two, there's no obvious breach of ethics and moral ever possible. And step number three, if there's any danger to life, of course, you cannot perform any actions which might put people's lives in danger. So, for example, if you try to get your ferry business back and people are not properly trained, but you put these large ferries into the sea, where they suddenly have untrained staff that are not ready, their job is not fit for use, not fit for purpose, they are not well trained, then you cannot start your business. So these are the first three steps, which you can never, ever consider as an appropriate means of action. And by the way, any other leader who's part of that business or any other business similar, if you don't say anything about that, you are complicit. There's a very simple rule: silence is violence, passivity is complicity. Staying silent on the matter just to protect your career or maybe the next job you want to get is never acceptable. It's called values. You should read about or maybe listen about that. People do not want to have any leader that only conducts their actions based on opportunistic behavior, who wants to see what in which situation, and you just change your behavior immediately once the tide turns or the tables turn. Of course, when and that was the case here as well in the UK, when there is a law that says employees have a right to be part of a certain council, then you have to grant them this right. If you like the council or not, that is not relevant. It is very important now that these councils, for example, could be created proactively. Instead of having a position of the union in your organization, you, way earlier, when the mood was still good with anyone, could have, for example, installed a council where people are represented or representing the people working in your organization. However, you can only do that voluntarily when the mood is still good, where there's no crisis on the horizon and no obvious conflict going on. Once you miss that moment that people have their say, by the way, that is a free ticket where you get everything presented. Any issue is presented to you and you can immediately take care of it for free. What's not to like about that? However, if you miss that moment and suddenly the unions force themselves, or unions or any other institution force themselves into your organization, of course they're going for conflict because they were created during the time of conflict. Very conflict-minded people will be part of these councils who openly attack you, your organization, your business, and different people in this organization. So it is very important that think about how will people have their say in your organization. Think about it when the situation is still great, or maybe when you have a great moment where you say, now we should have installed a council, but people have their say towards the board, the CEO, or similar. And by the way, if you have a remote work scenario, you must be an even better leader, because when you are in the remote work scenario, the social legitimization of leaders is way more important than the formal one. When you think you can lead any team, telling them, I'm a president and you're not, I'm a leader and you're not, I'm an SVP or any kind of other ridiculous title you have, if you think that anyone cares about that in a remote work scenario, you obviously lost the plot a long time ago. In a remote work scenario, opinion leadership, social justification, social leadership, and especially social legitimization of leaders is far more important than any title you have. Quite frankly, no one cares about your titles. And that is not even new. That changed years and years ago, that your titles were relevant. Of course, you can still say, I ignore all of that and then just openly run into the catastrophe, because good leadership, and especially excellent leadership, is a learned skill. It's not that someone wakes up and is the born leader. Born leaders do not exist. Some people have a bit more empathy, and that's, of course, helpful. However, Great leadership is something you get taught. You get told how to do. You learn a skill. Great leadership is not something which you inherit or genetically suddenly appears in your genes, or you wake up in the morning and you got enlightened by some magical power being a great leader. But when you do not teach your leaders how to be leaders, obviously, often people say something like, well, I don't want to spend money on it, or we don't have the budget. And then when you look at what they spend money on in other ways, you probably see that they have the money, they just don't want to spend it. When you ignore that and you do not teach and train and coach your leaders, the consequence will be immediately there. Catastrophic recruitment, bad organizational culture. The bad organizational culture multiplies throughout every organization, gets worse year by year, month by month, week by week. You have non-diversified and also non-diverse teams who, of course, do not deliver great results due to how you set the teams up and how you lead them. Your leadership style probably is something which you Google together, completely outdated or is totally focused on you. Any lack of additional training and qualification leads to the situation getting worse. And that is where we are right now. The main issue is that often today, and you can't even tell them that they are wrong with what they say. They say, I see what's happening out there. I had multiple leaders. I see the leaders out there, and they are all lying to us. That is, of course, a bit too general. However, when we do not do something against the misbehavior of leaders that constantly reappears over and over and over again, we should not be surprised that especially management-led organizations, not owner-led companies, where anyone knows that the owners, of course, have to take accountability with their own purse, except, of course, when you're already a billionaire and you have your money together and probably don't even care anymore, then you might have the same issue. So these companies where leaders misbehave constantly will lose trust, not only of their employees, but also of society, of potential clients. Your future is in danger. And the problem is, the less people speak up about misbehavior of these leaders, the situation will get worse each and every year until we reach a tipping point where suddenly dead strict laws will come in place after probably some other government was elected into power. And then suddenly entrepreneurs will complain, how could this have happened? Well, you created the situation by yourself. And anyone who knows me well, you find me in the liberal conservative spectrum. So I'm far away from being a left-wing person here. Of course, you now have to think about, how do you want to implement this? How do you want to train and teach your leaders? What do you want to do right now? And it's very important. I, of course, have written articles about that as well. So if you want to know more about that, go to expert.nb-networks.com. Just put your email address in there. Once per week, you receive an email where everything that I published in that week is available for free. And it's very important that when you now have questions, you don't have to sit there and think on your own or Google around and hope that you click on the right article. Just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and we have a chat and take it from there. Of course, if you now think, hey, we need someone for training, speaking, coaching, consulting, mentoring, project interim management, I'm happy to help you there as well. However, when you just want to have a chat, perfect, doesn't cost you a single penny. Just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. The most important part now is that you apply what you heard and learned in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard and learned here, you will see the change that many organizations, especially right now, and especially in a remote leadership, remote work scenario, so desperately need. I wish you all the best implementing these in your organization. And for this week, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much for your time.